Octopath Traveler is a video game. In it you control a bunch of random characters as they go about their own life stories, individually, with basically no interaction between them while they do it. You can deploy nukes though, so that kinda makes up for it. In this video I will summarize and rank every single chapter 1 of each character. Why? Because my video storage is full and I want to use the footage for something. We'll be going in the order I picked them up from the map, and I did their chapter 1s. So, first up is our main character, Tressa. Tressa is a fairly simple character. I chose her because I prefer to play female characters and because I thought being a mage for the 30th time in an RPG would get old. In hindsight, it was a really good idea not to start with this boy. Tressa is the daughter of a merchant couple, and she's a merchant herself. And in case you forget, she will rub your face in it every other line. After a bit of tutorializing, her town gets attacked by a bunch of pirates, and apparently the town has 0 guards or law enforcement, which doesn't really make sense for a medieval setting, no matter which way you slice it, but whatever. She decided to steal back the stuff the pirates ransacked by bringing them a cask of poisoned wine, which puts them to sleep. And if she was written by me, it would have been the long sleep. But Tressa is a whole lot more merciful, so she only gave them a sleeping draught. After killing those that do wake up and attack her, she gets her stuff back, has a boss battle, gets saved even though she didn't need it, and sets off in the footsteps of a random guy in his diary. You might say I'm glossing over her fairly quickly, and it's because I kinda am. There are 3 main categories of these first chapters: inoffensive, great, and awful, and she falls into the first category. What I will say is that Tressa as a person seems to be infatuated with a sort of overly positive look of capitalism that you sometimes hear from anarcho-capitalists. The idea that merchants should and will only sell things that the buyer actually need and don't gouge them in any way, which just isn't the case. In a capitalist system, the cutthroats rise to the top and will stay there, semi-permanently. If you view this as a character flaw of hers, then it works, but I did want to bring attention to it so we can come back to it in later chapters. She is going firmly in B tier. Cyrus. Let me just get this out of the way right now. Cyrus, from a gameplay standpoint, is absolutely insane. He has by far the strongest class in the game, at least the one I've seen so far, and that kinda lines up with why I hate him so much. He feels like a complete self-insert, to the point that if he isn't, I have no fucking clue what happened in the writer's room. He is a super smart mage who teaches royalty. Both the random noblewoman and the princess are implied to like him, and the noblewoman is madly fallen for him. He's portrayed as a mega genius detective, and everyone basically sucks his dick, including himself. And may I remind you, he's the strongest base class in the game already. Despite this, he's a complete oxymoron. His whole shtick is that he's very book smart but has 0 social skills, so he can't tell that the girl who's obviously in love with him is in love with him. But his special action he can take on the map is literally that he can read and investigate people like a book. Is the joke meant to be that he's so stupid that he doesn't think to use that on someone he meets every single day? Because it ain't funny. He just doesn't make sense. Now for his actual story. He teaches a very boring history class, half of which I just skipped because the lore was so boringly presented. Although I did have a good chuckle when one of the girls asked what religion the country that died yesterday had, and Cyrus replied that they couldn't know. Which just wasn't 2000 years ago. Do you seriously not have any long-term memory? Maybe he's counted as smart because in the world of the deaf-blind, the man with one half-functioning cataract eye is king. A book then goes missing. He does an investigation, he finds the culprit. This guy looks so obviously evil that I will pat the writers on the head if he is just a red herring and not actually the villain, but we all know he's going to be. And Cyrus is told to leave because there is a rumor that he fucked the princess. A rumor which was spread by the noblewoman in love with him. And at this, I had a bit of a meltdown. Woman. Being. You human-shaped bag of aces. People have been beheaded for less. Do you think this is really the best way to get him to spend more time with you? I guess the apprentice is just like the master. If there weren't 2 stories that are even worse than Cyrus's, he could go lower than F, but hey, consolation prize, he's at least bad at being the worst too. After spending so much time on Mr. Thickhead, we can relax with a pretty inoffensive third character, Ophelia. Ophelia is a standard RPG healer, and by stating that I basically gave you 90% of her character. Only other thing to note is, and the spin that makes the story not become very boring very quickly, is that she wasn't supposed to have the role she plays as. She's the adopted daughter of a priest of an in-game deity, and she's best friends with the priest's daughter. It's all very lovey-dovey until the priest starts dying and her sister needs to take part in a ceremony where she has to go basically everywhere but fucking here. Ophelia, not being as attached to the guy nearly as much as her sister, showed well by the writing as she always calls him by his name instead of dad, because she's a cunt, volunteers to take on the task instead so that her sister can stay with their dad on his final days. It's very cute, until you realize that if your party didn't come along, then she would die, and if she didn't volunteer, her sister would fucking die, because her boss fight at the end of chapter 1 would decimate her. In theory, I know how the game's scaling works, I just think it's funny, okay? I feel like the story had a massive night out, and Cyrus was them riding hungover, while Ophelia is a standard return to form. An overall B, same as Tressa. My fourth character, and the last default party member, is Mr. Thorium. If you know the layout of the map, you might realize that I skipped right over a character. Because of how straight-laced Tressa was, I thought it would be fun to have a thief around to talk shit about her. Unfortunately, as I mentioned, the characters barely acknowledge each other's existence outside of combat, so that was a bust. Oh, and as for Hunt, oh, don't ya fucking worry your little heads, I'll fucking get to her, and boy will I have shit to talk. So then, Therion. Therion. What a good chapter. All to stumble at the finish line right into a punji pit and make it all stupid. As I mentioned earlier, Therion is the thief character and he has two main plot points. One is the mystery of his partner, who we aren't sure why they are working together anymore, and thankfully it's left up to interpretation, which gives it enough pull for you to actually want to find out. And his current state as a very good thief who is trying to break into a manor which is guarded by these dogs who got the moves. Very intimidating. And Therion does love himself a challenge, so he takes the bait. Just when he's about to lift the treasure, which he assumes isn't worth much because he isn't a master thief but a master buffoon, Mega Jeeves Jeeves is spelled with a W, you twit. So Mega Jeeves shows up and tells him that he's looking for a very good thief. Therion wants none of this, so he just tries to leave, but Jeeves becomes a Megazord and there's a boss fight. After it though, the writing takes a nosedive off a cliff. Suddenly, Megazord attaches a bangle to your arm, which is a bangle of shame, which shows how you're a beta male thief who got caught while stealing. Woe is you. Therefore, they blackmail you to go and steal back the other jewels of the manor. If you're wondering where the bangle came from, don't worry. I am too. It wasn't established earlier, it isn't established why Therion cares so much, it isn't established why he can't just remove it, and it isn't established why Therion doesn't just stab the guy who he already beat in combat once, steal the keys from him, take the jewel, and run away, shitting and giggling along the way. It makes no sense. It's so dumb because it comes out of nowhere. It doesn't get any explanation, and it just feels like the writers panicked that they must have a boss fight, but after it, Therion wouldn't be in a cooperative mood with the guy he just slapped around. But none of this stupid bangle nonsense was necessary. If you just posted a big meatloaf of a man in front of the jewel that Therion could just beat as his first boss, Jeeves and the Countess could just show up, tell him he's very good, and point him in the direction of some other heavily guarded jewels. He clearly enjoys stealing from fortified places, and I'm guessing the other chapters won't have the jewels unguarded either. He should be happy that he could resell the jewels easily, and even if you wanted to go with the bangle angle, he has multiple flashbacks in which you could explore why bangles can't be removed and why they mean so much to Therion. Either way, it's really dumb, and I'm sad that it ruined an otherwise very good chapter. C tier. That left a bad taste in my mouth. And it doesn't get any better with the next. Holy fucking shit, I'm so bored by the next character, you have no idea. Zax, which, sorry to all Zax out there, your names are great, but your character is fucking boring. He isn't even called Zack, he's called Alfin. But that is such a boring name that I'm going to keep calling him Zack so I don't fall asleep. he's just a stock standard herbal healer. Then this boss fight being a big snake he has to beat so he can make some antivenom, and I'm going to sleep. There's nothing here. You know how I hated Cyrus? Well, this Cyrus made me angry, and driving me insane with bread writing is still better than driving me to bed with how dull the chapter is. And you could do so much with a herbal healer, like a plague. Or a plague. Mostly a plague, to be honest. Just make him set out on a quest to find a cure for a deadly plague that's killing his entire village, give us flashbacks to when it wasn't devastated and how people gradually become sick. Then after a mysterious figure comes along who gives him a hint as to where he can start and where the other ingredients will be, ending with him battling a physical manifestation of a plague in the form of a giant ball of snakes and pestilence at the end of his final chapter. You could make him religious and make it so that the mysterious figure was actually his god helping him and his people by pushing them in the right direction. Hell, we only had one religious person in this fucking fantasy medieval setting, which makes it less accurate, to be honest. Instead, the story goes for the lowest possible stakes, which, while it could be fine, Tressa isn't exactly becoming the pirate king either. She has two major advantages. She's energetic and likable, and in combat, very helpful. Zack is boring, lethargic, and in combat has to use items to achieve the same thing that a regular healer can do without using any resource. F tier. F tier all the way. Hell, I'll pull Cyrus up 1 tier just to rub it in. But thankfully, we get a respite from all that, and I get to wake up from my Zack-induced coma. Primrose. I find myself in a situation which isn't usual for me. Whereas I'm great at leveling criticism, I don't know where to start with how good this chapter is. So let's take it from the top. The vocal performances are fantastic. Well, I haven't talked much about the other voice actors, mostly because they do a competent job and that's about it. Primrose's voice actors really put her all into this. It fits her character perfectly, and her line delivery is on point at all points. And while we are at voice acting, kudos to the guy who did the owner of the cat house too. He's disgusting and terrible, and I fucking hate him. So overall, he did a very good job. Now to discuss the rest, let's go over her actual story. She's a perfect case of a simple story delivered well.
Hello. My name is
Primrose.
You killed my father. Prepare to die.
She left what shambles of her nobility behind and used what she learned during her younger years as a dancer to become a courtesan of sorts. Well, the game calls them all dancers, but it's pretty obvious that they're also straight up prostitutes. It shows that the character is extremely determined to get their revenge, and that alone makes it compelling. I also love this chapter because it doesn't pull any punches. Your father is dead. Your best friend gets killed. The character has had to deal with so much bullshit throughout her life, and within this chapter, she's subjected to dialogue that made me cringe from disgust just listening to it. And this all builds up and makes fighting the boss so much more impactful and rewarding compared to other chapters, as you finally give the pig what he always deserved. 10 out of 10. S+++. Please more chapters like this one. Next up, while not quite as good, Albrecht has a pretty good chapter 1 as well. I can't tell if it's odd or fitting that they put the two stories where people can actually die right next to each other. Anyway, we find out why our characters are special. They have the 5 brain cells required to wield weapons instead of just punching everyone. As you can see by these armies of unarmed soldiers threatening each other with their fists only. They must be Dark Souls players. Anyway, after his friend, Fabio, kills the king they were both supposed to protect, and makes Albrecht touch some grass, he finds himself guarding a town and training its villagers to fight properly. While crestfallen knights aren't the most unique thing, there's something inherently endearing about someone losing their honor and having to get it back. Anyway, his protege gets kidnapped by bandits because they think having to take care of a child will be fun, so he goes and rescues them. The bandit boss is actually an interesting character. He isn't the blumbering brute that you usually see as the default, despite what his pixel art would tell you, but seems to have some honor, which contrasts well with Albrecht. After an entertaining chat and Cyrus nuking him in half, old Heisenberg sets out on his quest to put a few holes in Fabio. And while I will subtract a few points for having the kid be voice acted by a grown woman instead of an actual kid, it's not enough to lower the chapter below an A. Oh boy. Last, But definitely least, we arrive to Hanit. I will just call her Hunt, or Hunt, from now on. What happens in her story? I don't care. She stabs some stupid mangy dog and that's it. But that isn't the problem. This is. Do you see it? How about the next sentence? And the next one? And the next one? They're all spamming this shitty annoying to read old-timey bullshit. But let's take a step back and tell me why this makes me so extremely angry. In my book, I have a character called Imus. He's a naive, likable sailor with some fish blood in his veins and a heart of gold. Now, because he's from the north, he has an accent where he pronounces every S sound as a C. In my first few drafts, I made this visible in reading as well, making the story look like this. But on my rereads, I realized just how goddamn insufferable this was to read. And he isn't a side character either, he's part of the main group and gets a lot of dialogue. So I did keep his accent by mentioning it, I didn't flag it in writing because it was so terrible to read. Hunt is that first draft of Imus, but even worse because her speech makes no sense. I don't care how old-timey you are, you're going to say t or n after every fucking random word. You say dine, thou, and all that shit, and that would be fine, but this is so fucking excessive that I'm legitimately surprised it could make it into a finished product. I'm pretty sure half of these aren't even words. It looks like one of the writers went, well, if you get to have your overpowered self-insert, I get to have my hunter wife who is incapable of speech. After reviewing my footage again, I also find that this entire chapter is just an energy vacuum. I get tired by how fucking slow it all is, and I'm going to fall asleep by the end. If the quality of your writing is so fucking bad, and I can't even understand the story because I spend so much time being so annoyed, then don't be surprised that I will put you way lower than anything else. And if things don't change, I'm pretty sure every other Hunt chapter will stay there. Well, that's every chapter 1 explained and ranked. If you stuck around this long, you probably don't hate the sound of my voice and agree with me on at least a few points. But if you don't, you can always tell me below. I would be legitimately interested in how Zack and Hunt could be redeemable. Also, if you're still here, you would probably enjoy the other things I post every other 4 months, so do subscribe. And because I will likely not make a part 2 unless people actually want to see it, let me know that you enjoyed this by giving me a thumbs up. Until then, this has been your friendly neighborhood Marshmallow, and hopefully I'll see you again next time.